controversial subjects with the facts can be tense, but we are ASAP Science here to make things make sense.
So you kind of brought this up, like...
Yeah, loneliness was related
that...
to a study I brought up recently because they had released some stats that like people on average would see their friends in person around 6 hours a week only a decade ago, and now it's down to 3 hours a week.
Wow.
And that, you know, there's been a lot of buzz in the news, obviously since the pandemic, but even before that, like, have we entered a loneliness epidemic? Are people more socially isolated than ever before? Has the internet ironically disconnected us?
So there's also a study that came out that said that loneliness is highest in young adults. 79%, like in this specific study asking people about it, between the ages of 18 to 24, compared to only 41% in those age 66 and older. So that was like kind of saying a lot of people assume older people are more lonely because they're like retired or whatever, but there is something happening in young people aged 18 to 24. And then also another Gallup poll, it was like done with Academic Advisors and Meta, said that a quarter of people in the US surveyed said they feel very or fairly lonely.
Yeah.
So like a quarter, and like, okay, yeah, that is a lot to self-identify as that word.
I believe it's like the former Surgeon General of the United States had said that is more than the amount of people who have diabetes and more than the amount of people who smoke. So it's like his point was, because he's done a lot of research on loneliness, and he's like, we don't know, like, is there correlation? Is there causation? But we know it's a thing that affects a lot of people that we should maybe be looking at more and figuring out, like, is this a serious problem in people's lives? Are there negative health outcomes? Because recent studies have started to say, like, people who are lonely have a higher chance of XYZ, which we'll go through today and figure out, like, are there enough stats or studies to support this evidence?
So one thing that like all the studies talk about is how loneliness is different than social isolation. It's so funny how often this is brought up.
Well, it makes sense because I think as a social idea that people might just think loneliness is to be alone, but that's not necessarily true. Like, lots of people enjoy their solitude, right? Like, solitude's a very distinct form of being alone that you can enjoy. People love being alone and reading books or working on projects themselves. And conversely, many people can be around other people and still feel lonely. So it's not just about being isolated. I have a definition that I like the most. Like, there's a handful of scientific definitions, but they said loneliness is technically, from a scientific perspective, the subjective discrepancy between our actual level of social connection and our desired level of social connection.
So wanting more social
connection. I love
connection.
thinking about that as that gap. And so social connection is obviously the key word here, because you could be surrounded by people all day long, but if you feel that you're not actually connected to them, that might even be a harder form of loneliness, right? To be alone, you can expect to be lonely in times, but to be around people and feel not connected is loneliness.
Yeah, they said social. Oh my God! Wait, social isolation. Is that okay?
Wow,
I'm gonna pass out. Social isolation is when someone has few meaningful social relationships. Loneliness is the subjective experience of being unsatisfied with those relationships and a state of mind linked to wanting human contact but feeling alone. But then they are constantly like, but obviously they're linked. Because I'm like,
the odds are higher if you're isolated.
If you have a few meaningful social relationships, you're obviously also going to feel lonely.
Not necessarily, but the odds are higher. Some people are very content being isolated and alone.
Yeah, I guess.
And I think that it's just important to distinguish, because I think anyone listening to this should know, like, it's important to have alone time. Like, and for a lot of people like myself, like, I really enjoy alone time. It helps me to, like, recharge my battery, as they say, that I think it's okay to be like, being alone doesn't make you lonely.
Yeah.
But obviously the more you're alone, the higher the odds are that you will become lonely. And that loneliness is actually a mechanism similar to hunger and thirst.
Yeah, it did evolve, they think, in order to have like this quote unquote bad feeling that would make you seek out relationships, like in hunter-gatherers. That's like one evolutionary concept. It's like, you feel lonely, aka desiring more social relationships in order to hopefully go out and get them.
Yeah,
because
in the same way that, like, hunger is not bad, but it's telling you need to eat.
Yeah.
Loneliness is not inherently bad. It's actually a thing that's, like, you should go find people because you need, and obviously if we speak on it like from an evolutionary
Like, it makes
theory
sense,
perspective,
yeah.
like humans do so well in groups. We come from groups, we lean on each other.
That's why we
rely on
took
each other.
over, folks.
Yeah.
So sad. It's
And
like ruining
so
the world. But
it's
anyways.
obviously inherent to the success of the human species to like need each other. And if you do feel lonely and don't have connections, this mechanism is there to make you go get it. But obviously on a chronic level, if you don't have social connection and this is there, then that's similar to hunger. Like it is a feeling that's going to make you feel bad, make you feel wrong. And
now we realize like gonna make you sick.
potentially,
Yeah.
make you sick, affect your body and
Yeah.
your brain.
Okay, let's talk about that stuff because it is fascinating. And like actually there's a lot of hard science on it. It's
Yeah.
definitely something that like you want to be a PhD student right now, like it's a hot button topic.
Yeah.
I think because of phones and stuff, but like they can't find the direct connection. But obviously our lifestyles have changed so much.
Yeah, that's what I find interesting in reading about this is that major transformation from like, it's like we used to be such a communal species, and we obviously still are in so many ways, but like with the Industrial Revolution and like this idea of individualism and the movement of like people moving into single family homes,
Yeah.
like, or maybe single family is the wrong word, but like single use homes. I think I have a stat somewhere about,
Yeah, we're not meant to be doing this.
so it was like the rise of the single person home didn't happen until the 1950s.
just so recent in evolutionary terms.
In the 1950s, then 9% of households were single households. And in 2018, 28% of all US households were single, like physically. And in Manhattan right now, around 44% of households are single homes. So it goes to show like we are now more distinctly isolated physically. However, the research also is mixed because it's like lots of people who live in alone are actually more socially connected.
Yeah, I was gonna be like, if you're in Manhattan, you get to go down, have a little cocktail at the hot new bar. I'm sure there's lots of lonely people in Manhattan, but at least every time I go to New York, I'm like, there's people everywhere. I feel so alive.
Yeah, and I think these studies are often like actually people who live in single use, what am I calling it? Single households have more connections than married people. Like on average, they're actually going and doing more things. So it's not just that we're isolated in this way more than before, but obviously that's an interesting anthropological thing that has happened in the last century.
And like evolution's so long, like humans have only been around for like hundreds of thousands of years. Like it's not that long. It takes so long for evolution to have any impact on like the adaptations of a body that like we are vastly changing our lifestyles in a way that like it makes sense that our brain is like not built for this. So okay, let's talk about the brain. So like in neurochemistry, like essentially like when social needs go on unmet, they have found that your brain changes. Like there's a change in connection between your neurons and the like actual volume of your brain. One study found that you're 1.64 times more likely to develop dementia if you identify as being lonely. And so the thing is like it's hard for them to know from a neurobiological perspective, like is it people have different brains, they become lonely, or do they become lonely and their brain changes?
yeah,
like they'll never know that.
The directionality
or they might
and
know
causation
that,
is, I think the hardest part, and a lot of studies point out that loneliness as a metric is actually very hard to measure, unlike other forms of connectivity. So like being married, for example, is a very objective form of connectivity. You are in a union with somebody. So we can then compare, are married people have a higher risk of dementia or heart disease or whatever? But loneliness is like a much more amorphous way to categorize something, and everyone's definition of it is a little different personally. So when we have these connections between dementia, or it's like people who are lonely live shorter lives, increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of depression. But like you said,
people
what
who
came first?
But it's also like people who have to self-identify as lonely. They can't like know for sure that someone's lonely, and then
Yeah, they're not just able to go like, let's look at the brain and we can literally point out this person has 5% more loneliness and has 5% more depression. And the question is like, do you become depressed first and then start isolating and then become lonely, right? Like what it's just so intermixed and difficult to really parse out. There are definitely more studies, especially like people, when it first happened, there was like a minister of loneliness in the UK or something like that. And like a lot of people made fun of it because it's like, it's such a bureaucratic way to like try and solve something. But at the same time, they thought it was like a good step in just making it an accessible topic and being like, okay, countries maybe do need to take this seriously and have divisions that are dedicated to looking at this and studying this and putting money into this and thinking about, are there solutions to helping people who feel lonely? Like another interesting study that popped up was like the number one risk factor of dying in a heat wave is living alone, which is really interesting. It was like the people who live alone don't necessarily realize they're having heat stroke or don't have somebody who can like call for help if they are in danger. And not just heat stroke, but I mean, if you fall and you live alone and hurt yourself or become unconscious, like having somebody else around you increases your odds of safety.
Yeah.
Right?
So they're like, okay, so back to these studies, like lonely people observe the world differently is like one essentially like, I would say what this study is saying pretty confidently. So they used MRIs and they again have people who self-identify as lonely and people who self-identify as non-lonely, which is like really important because that's the only way they can understand and divide people into different groups. Then they made them watch videos of people playing sports and watch videos of people on a date. So the non-lonely people all had similar neural responses to the videos. Like they would like look at the same parts of the videos, like their brains would react the same way, they'd be excited like in similar ways. Whereas the MRI results for the people who self-identified as lonely, all their brains acted differently and also differently from the other lonely people. So it's like non-lonely people's brains reacted to the videos the same. The lonely people's brains all were different, and then they're like,
But
that's
different from each other.
Yes, and they're like, that may also mean that those lonely people aren't able to like
Connect together, like they're experiencing it differently, so it's not like they can all come together.
Yeah, if a bunch of lonely people all experience it the same way, they could come together and be like, oh yeah, like didn't
I
you
relate
feel
to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, like,
and then that creates this like feedback loop of loneliness potentially where they're like trying to seek company, but they're feeling like other people aren't understanding them. And like you're kind of like, oh, that's just like a really interesting like neurochemical study. And then another one that they did was they deprived people of food for 10 hours and social interactions for 10 hours. And then they like made them look at videos of food and social interactions, and their brains responded in the same way of this like longing for the food and longing for the social interactions. So there is like the feeling of loneliness is like similar to hunger in that one.
Inherent like desire that gets triggered.
Yeah. And then the last thing was just in mice, they found that like when they deprive them of social interactions, there is this like specific type of release of dopamine that makes you crave like for mice it'd be like food, but in humans they're like, okay, if we extrapolate that to humans, like maybe lonely people are more like susceptible to drugs or sex addiction, or like maybe there's like also this weird way that they could be falling into substance abuse and things like that because the loneliness is like messing with their dopamine pathways.
Yeah.
But that's also just in mice, so it's kind of like, you know.
Right. You just have to like take it with a grain of salt.
And then another thing is
like cheese, as I like to say.
Oh, and like your brain is a muscle, like in the sense that like social interactions, like you kind of need to exercise them. So it's like, it's like when you're meeting people and your brain has to work to socially interact, it's like you're going to get better at social interaction. Whereas when you're like isolated, this is my issue with the social isolation thing. It's like, I just think it's so linked. If you're isolated, you're not, you know, learning how to interact socially. So like when you do, you maybe aren't as good at it.
Yeah,
and then you feel more lonely.
Disconnected because you're like not able to communicate or get in or
Okay, question.
Yeah.
A survey comes. Are you lonely? What do you say?
And
Let's say that the survey says yes
or no.
Okay, I guess it would.
It would probably be a scale. It would probably be like very like, do you agree with this statement?
Yeah.
I am lonely. Very much agree to like don't agree at all.
Okay, do it 1 to 5. 5 being not lonely at all, 1 being so lonely.
I think I'm not very lonely, to be honest.
So what number? 4, 5?
Like 4 out of 5 is like 0 lonely. See, for me, like I definitely experience loneliness, and there's been times in my life where I've felt way more lonely than I do now.
You don't feel lonely.
When I feel lonely now, in this kind of loneliness we're talking about, then I will be like, I need to see friends. And I think like we have a very strong social circle that I have access to that, which is nice. But I do have a part of me, like an existential part of my brain that feels sometimes very disconnected and isolated within myself. It's that same thing of like, there's another voice in my brain that is very self-aware of like being a being within a body. I don't really know how to describe this, but sometimes that can make me existential and feel very alone because
you need to do so many mushrooms.
Yeah,
you need
okay.
To ego death. I'm so that guy. I'm like, you need to like inject yourself with ketamine.
Okay. But to me, yeah, I think the loneliness for me comes from sometimes not having a hard time being seen. And there are my certain friends that I know do see me, but even then, sometimes like it does take me a lot to get to that point with people. And I think it's why I really do love one-on-one interactions, which we've been talking about recently. Like I think I thrive more in small groups, whereas in a larger group, I have a harder time managing like who I am in those groups. And so in that way, I do sometimes feel lonely and I feel alone in my own brain. But from like an actual sociability element of lonely, like we do have lots of friends. I feel like through the years and with your help, because you're a super social person, it keeps me contacted.
A super social person.
A super social person. So I feel very connected to my friends and I do have access and we do see people a lot. So I get enough of those moments to charge myself. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
I'm like talking about it recently. You've also been reflecting how you talk so much.
Oh, shut up.
I'm like, LOL. I'm like 1 to 5. Are you lonely? And then it's like,
okay, 1 to 5. Are you lonely?
Yeah. Like you said, what? I'm asking 4.
4.
Okay. I think I'm 3.
You're more lonely than me.
I do think like
that's a trope, isn't it? People who are like outgoing.
Well, I'm just thinking, yeah, I'm like, cause you like I think innately, yeah, no, I think a 3. Like, I think I'm so outgoing and I socialize with people and I'm good at social interaction. So I get it all. But then sometimes I'm just like, I need so much more.
Wow, you're talking so much. Could you like stop talking and just say the number?
Okay, whoa, mine was 30 seconds. Yours was 5 minutes.
I'm joking.
I said 3 because I think I need more.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It brings me back to the definition. It's like your desired level of social connection is probably higher than mine.
Exactly. So it's like, yeah, like that's why I went to school. I literally was like, I can't live ASAP science life
and be isolated.
Like it's so not meant for me. I was meant to be a teacher. I was meant to be at a school interacting with kids every day. There's like some stat that teachers have like, it's something crazy. I learned it in teachers college. They have like 12,000 interactions a day because like they include like every kid counts, and then the hallway. And then it's like, it's
how
like,
often you're like having an interaction with someone.
Yeah. And they're just like, it's an extremely like, it's like people in healthcare, these people like their brains are, it's obviously stressful and bureaucratic, but from like a physiological standpoint, it's like brilliant. It's
You're
like
stimulated by people all day.
Yes. And like a lot of people go to like a cubicle or go like, even for school, it's like, I'm so happy I get more interactions compared to when we were in ASAP Science. So I'm feeling less lonely, but it still isn't the same as teaching.
Right.
Or it's like, you can, if you want, just go to your desk and I see myself doing it and like getting my work done.
Yeah.
And like last night, people came into like where I was painting and I was like literally like doing research about loneliness while my paint dried and was like, okay, I should talk to them. Because it's like you have to actively still talk to people even though you're at school.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're a teacher, you're forced to because you're like, hey, class.
Yeah.
And you have to like lead.
Have the choice. Yeah.
And then there's like an office where there's like 8 people and you have to discuss what you're doing at like for the like upcoming event or whatever. So anyways, I'm like, I do feel like I'm 3 because I do need more.
Yes.
And I need more than you, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the problem for me is like, you know, if I look at my calendar on a week and I have nothing, it's like one of the best feelings. Like if I don't like have anything in the evenings and I don't have too many meetings during the week, I'm like, oh my God, I just get to be with myself this whole week and focus and take my time. But where that becomes a problem for me, I think, is it's like you said, it's like that practice. Like I enjoy the alone time, but then sometimes I think I linger in it so much
oh my God,
that it disconnects me.
Every time I go away, I come home and you're like, I didn't leave the house for the 5 days you were gone. And I think I'm depressed. And I'm like, what?
Okay.
Like you've actually said that to me numerous times. I'm like, you're like, I just played like I don't even know. You're always like, I don't know where the week went. And it's so interesting that I'm like,
I think
you
like
think you want nothing. You think you want to do nothing.
Us.
We're on a podcast.
What?
Oh, I thought you were saying like between us, like
no, yeah, between like, only us. No, like between
recording.
the two of us in terms of our personality differences. I think you process life so much faster that alone time for me feels like it's giving me time to catch up. Like right now, there's like a lot of work on the go. And so when there's also a lot of social hangouts in my calendar, I get overwhelmed. As we've talked about, I'm not very good at scheduling and organizing, or it's a weakness of mine, as Greg likes to point out.
Well, oh my God.
And so it's kind of liberating when I'm like, okay, I've got the whole week to manage these things instead of having to go, this hour I'm doing this, then this hour I'm doing this. Like that overwhelms me. But that's not related to loneliness. And so it can cause me, I think, to be lonely. And then at the end of a 5-day streak of not seeing anyone, that emotion kicks in for me of like, damn, I've been alone this whole time. It's actually not. But it goes back to it being like a hunger emotion. Like, I think that's okay. When I become lonely, then I do think I am able to be like, I need to go see friends.
Yeah, as long as you're able to do
My
that.
limit is just a little further than yours. Like, I could easily go a week or two without talking to anyone.
And then sometimes you sort of express in a way where you're like, I wish I saw more people, but I couldn't.
Yeah,
Almost
but
like you
that
couldn't.
might be the hunger kicking in, the hunger of loneliness.
Yeah.
Right? Like during the week, I might not have felt that, but now that I've spent all this time alone,
that's true.
it's almost like I'm putting it on that, going like, oh, it's like I starved myself all week, and now I wish I was eating all week.
Yeah.
But I think I have a relatively okay balance of it right now. There's definitely stages in my life. And again, I'm so grateful that you're in my life because you keep it sociable in a degree that like allows me to just like tap in when works for me. Whereas if I was just on my own, I could see myself going week, month, whatever, and then really being like, oh my God, I've been alone and I feel really sad about it.
Yeah. Okay, we should talk about phones.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people are assuming it's phones. Because like young people, as we said, 79% are saying that they feel lonely compared to 41% and 65 plus. Like,
Right.
what are young people doing that 65 plus aren't like on their phones? Although it's like sometimes I meet older people, I'm like, damn, they're on Instagram a lot, or Facebook. But there isn't that. It's not as obvious as you think.
Yeah, and
based on the
I've
research.
heard like that Surgeon General and another really famous loneliness expert. They were kind of laughing, being like, the internet has become the greatest thing to blame for every problem in the world. Of course, it's affected our lives, but it's like it's easy to go there. Like studies have shown a trend that happens to track with when the internet came into existence, that people started feeling less connected. But it's easy to go like, look, the internet's fucked
It's an
us all up.
obvious like hypothesis. Like if you think of the scientific method, like I would obviously start there and be like, there's a screen that takes a bunch of your time. Sometimes it can make you feel connected because you're looking at someone's story, but you haven't talked to them. But the one study I read was that like there are people who use their phones in like very effective ways to make plans, to interact with people, and to feel like connected. And I was just like, damn, like it made me actually think about my own use of my phone. And like whenever I've done research about like phone use for ASAP Science, I always like try to remember like, yeah, certain people use their phones in negative ways. They only consume social media. They don't post. Like there's studies that are like, if you go on social media and you post and then you get off, it can feel good. It can feel active. Whereas when you're passively just like wasting time looking at other people's posts, comparing yourself, feeling alone, like it is like some people might have a completely okay relationship with their phone, and like we need to sometimes accept that before we just blame phones for like everything.
Yeah, and I think, and beyond just posting, I think some people actually genuinely have made social connections online.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Many
like
people,
they game and they chat.
That study we referenced in our previous episode, I made like a short reel in TikTok kind of talking about, because the question was like, do you have more or less friends than average? Like on average, people in America have 4 to 5 friends. And then I was just kind of putting that out there. But people in the comments were like, do online friends count? Like, I feel like I actually have a great community of friends on the
like
internet.
it should,
even though
right?
I don't see them, I'm talking to them. And I think that is totally legitimate. But I think like many people don't have that. So if you have legit online friends, I think that's really cool. And if you're spending time with them, that's a way to be using the internet that can probably actually bring you lots of joy and happiness.
It's interesting. It's cool.
Yeah. Whereas, of course, when you're consuming and seeing people having so much fun without you, or going to all these events, and you're gonna self-reflect on your life that you are lonely. Like it's just a perceived loneliness at that point, because you're like constantly seeing people do other things without you. Yeah, but in general, like I was trying to like find like what are the best quality studies. It is such a range of like how many
It's
people
so
are
hard.
lonely.
Yeah.
A lot of the scientists who are the leads in this field are like, we actually just don't know.
And
like
even phone use is so hard.
Yeah.
Like they're just like, we're in a trend of like young people are like suffering from the phone. And it's like, of course, but like the actual hard science is really hard to get right now.
Yeah, and there's so many other things happening. Like people are struggling with like jobs and struggling
Yeah.
with being able to afford rent and homes and food and inflation so high. Like there's so many reasons that could influence people being like, I can't spend money, I can't go out. I'm not seeing
one thing
friends.
I'd say is like
Third
school,
spaces.
like school is so messed now with like online. Like I'm a TA for an online class. It's so depressing. It's like I would actually meet these kids.
Right, you
Like
get to actually
there is a
chat to them
serious
before and
fundamental
after.
shift that like someone should do a research on, which is just
sure
like
they are.
secondary education's impact of COVID, where they were like, literally it's a crash grab, and we can just like not pay for like a space for these kids, and therefore they're all like, I'm just like, that to me has to do with technology and phone use. It's not the same as phone use, but it's like, this
Yeah.
is depressing. I've been to university
It's not
before
the same
this.
level of connection that
Like
you would
should
get
like
in
you should
person.
not have to pay for online classes or pay half the price.
I agree.
Like it's like we should be up in arms. It's just not the same, and it's not fair.
Yeah, and it's one thing to want that, and it's like, of course, it's great that people can go, I don't want to have to like move across the country and
Yeah,
pay
or, like,
rent, and I
commute.
would choose to be doing it online. It's a great option, but as the default, forcing everyone to be in an online class, I think, is a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, like you can stream
so
the
much-
class, but you have a place you can go if you want to physically.
Yeah, so much of our university experience and your high school and grade school experience is socialization.
And no one like in this class, like he'll ask a question and just like no one answers because there's no pressure to answer
Yeah.
because you're sitting behind a
I
screen.
mean, to be fair, that kind of happens in like normal classes.
no, but
as
it doesn't
well,
because
but-
I'm in a bunch of normal classes.
Yeah.
Like
People are more
like that
engaged.
prof stands there silently, and then a couple people are like, "Well, fuck, this is so awkward," and they put their hand up. When you're on an online class and no one says
Yeah.
anything, the prof just moves on because
Yeah.
there's not like an actual like pressure, and
It's
he
not the
can't
same, yeah.
be like, "Oh, screen, blah blah blah," like whatever. Okay, let's move on to the like maybe.
Well, the one thing I want to say is there was like a really popular headline that got tossed around for a bit that was being lonely is equivalent to smoking, I think it was 15 cigarettes a day or something like that. And this did come from a real study, but then I listened to the author of that study
so
try and
epic.
clarify. It's kind of true, but they were, again, it was like a huge meta-analysis that looked at 300,000 subjects over 150 studies. They were looking at what happens when people lack social connections, and they did find people who are more socially connected have a 50% better chance of survival in across.
yes, yeah,
whatever.
that is yes.
Like they
I
tend
get
to be
that.
healthier. They
Yeah.
tend to have less health
And
problems.
even like when you retire, it's like you have to stay social or else like you literally die.
Yeah,
younger.
but the cigarette thing got picked out,
Duh.
and they were trying to say like also it got pitted against loneliness, but loneliness is just one factor again of connectedness, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just, and it's the hardest one to categorize.
Yeah.
That they were like, of course it got blown up when there's other forms of connectedness that also when you lack them are similar to like they even use like alcohol smoking and
Alcohol smoking.
alcoholism is what they said.
oh.
Obviously these are the things that the media picks up and they're like, being lonely is the same as the death outcomes of alcoholism and of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. People freak out. But it's really like, yes, there are measurable health outcomes, but it's so hard to do the causation part.
Yeah.
The
So
thing-
I thought you said I just saw it before we move on. I just want to do your like
how to fix it?
how to fix, and then yeah.
The only
it.
thing I came across that, and this was again advice from that former Surgeon General of the US. He was like, the most effective way to fight loneliness is service. Like helping other people shifts your perspective of like constantly focusing on yourself and moves it to other people and reminds you of your value to be able to help people.
That's so cool. And like also being in art school, that's like all they're teaching us. It's so cool. I'm like, art school is such an amazing like therapeutic tool. They're just like, oh yeah, what is art? Well, what is anything if you don't help your community? And you're just like, okay,
I
true.
think that is the challenge though, is that we have less access to community than ever before.
And I think that's why art school is now designed like this, because they're like, well, if we're gonna be a like mode of, if we're gonna be a whole section of a university, we have to have value, and that could be our value, because you're not learning about that necessarily in the sciences. You're not learning about that necessarily in like
Yeah.
other classes where it's like it's why I'm like learning to really appreciate art in the sense that like if it's trying to have a function, it should be how do we break people out of their like specific, let's just use this example, lonely lives to be part of a community, because that is like, I mean, also like thinking about decolonization, like we are in like a colonial settler place that has been set up to make us isolated and capitalist and work. And it's like, okay, that takes a lot of effort to challenge that. And like everything is working against you. Like truly no one is like wants you to like be part of a community, because that's like
not no one wants you to, but our
like,
society's
everything
set up
is set up to not
to make you be doing things on your own.
It's crazy,
and like exploiting your energy for capital gain is what
like
most
if you
people
go on
are
like if you use your phones, like go on Instagram Reels, it's like going to be about partying, it's going to be about like, it's not going to be about like going to do something in your community.
It's going to be about like making your body better. It's going to be
or
about
like
optimizing your
meal.
efficiency with work and how to make more money and how to, it's not.
Or even like look at this gorgeous meal that I got to go and eat, and like I was like, okay, I'm going to go make money so I can go and eat that meal and like have that. It's very hedonistic and like unless
and
I'm just like maybe I'm not on community TikTok.
And there probably is like
you know what I mean?
I
like
think that's the hardest part is we're in a phase of society where community is actually like you have to actively seek it out, whereas in the past it was just built into your society. So whether that was going to church or being part of a union or being part of like communities that were set up that you just like arrive at a space every week because there's a schedule, and then you just are around other people. And now it's like you have to actively be like, okay, I gotta make plans this week and then next week and find ways to hang out with people. It is exhausting. People have less time than ever, and I think like there is such a need for, I hate calling it third spaces, I know that's what it's called, like, but it's not spaces? Well, third spaces are like you have your home, you have your work, and a third space is like the community you're a part of. But a lot of times it's like cafes or like bars, but some people are like, but there's really few third spaces that exist that don't cost money. That's like a challenge for people when they're like, I don't want to have to go out and spend money. And there's a lot of discourse. I saw like a really interesting
like parks.
Yeah, but then how do you meet people? And it's harder to meet people than ever because everyone's on their phones. And I think it's like we are all desiring, it sounds bad, but we need an easier way to have community because that existed before. Like you need something
get ready
set
for our
up.
bird watching trip in May in Hyde Park for ASAP Science. That's our one community that we have. Reach out in May. I don't know, maybe 17th. We can all meet in Hyde Park and go bird watching, and that can be our community.
Book your plane tickets if you're coming from across the globe.
Oh my God. Or maybe not. That's too much pressure.
No, I know. But some people last year were like, I would have flown in if I had known.
I would have been like dancing
That's too much
like
pressure.
An absolute clown to make that worth it. I'd be like, I would like honestly want to hang out with them all night. Okay, anyways. Okay, cool. So service other people, that sounded dirty, but like, service to other people. And like community, we need to fight for community. More on this for the rest of our podcast
I think
forever.
The best advice that I think I've made on this podcast, and it's really hard to live up to, but it's like, how do you build a reoccurring structure so you don't have to make community plans?
There goes your weekly. You're nothing to do this week.
No, I know. It's honestly so
You're like,
true.
I love when my schedule is completely empty. You're like a reoccurring schedule.
low effort hangouts, right? Like I love with a couple of our friends, we have like, it's kind of fallen apart and you get sick or people are away, but it's like just watching a TV show once a week with a couple of friends and having that be a recurring thing where it's like, it's low effort, but then when you're together, you have the chance to like chat and decide to do something else or do more. But then you're not like every week trying to refigure out how am I going to have those interactions. They're just there. And when people can't make it, they don't make it.
Yeah.
But I think like it's tough. You have to put in the effort to build that first. But I think it reminds me of like the church where a lot of people found their community a long time ago. But it's like less of that exists now.
We are going to continue to talk about community, and we're going to make more episodes about community, and we're going to build a community.
How do we do that? That'd be so fun.
I literally I know I keep saying bird watching, but like that's an example.
Yeah, but
we're
bird watching
others.
is like, how can we do something that's like more
cross-country
regular
skiing in the winter?
But like
going to pick acorns.
We don't
soon.
want like 100 people coming cross country skiing.
Why not? What the heck? That's
I guess
great.
You're right, but I would love to try and. These are great ideas. I'm
like, well, you're not coming then.
No, this is my problem. This time.
like, why are you saying no?
No, because I'm like, is there something on a weekly or monthly basis that would be the same every month instead of having to invent a new like this month is skiing,
everything's
that
the
month
same. It's
bird
always
watching.
in High Park. We just go to High Park and you do whatever you do in the park. I'm just saying the seasons change. So it's like In November, it's going to be picking seeds.
Yeah.
In winter, it's going to be like
Skiing
walking in
or-
the snow. Like
yeah.
I'm just saying it can't always be the birds, but that's the most
Anyway, if
magnificent
people have
time.
ideas, I'd love to hear them in terms of like, it would be cool. It's something we've lacked with our online presence, quote unquote, because there's part of us that's wanted to like keep our like personal lives separate from our like digital like work life. But I think with the
But it's
podcast
like, yeah,
especially,
and
it's
people-
like, it's nice. If people live locally, it would be cool to like do things and make friends and just be around people.
And
in a
people are
unique way.
so like actually like Instagram or like Twitter or like YouTube famous, and if they go outside they get like mauled, but like that's not us.
Yeah, we
we've
can
created such
exist.
an amazing life for ourselves that we could definitely do this, and it wouldn't be like I'm a Chamberlain, can't go to High Park.
She's like causing chaos.
Yeah,
in
like
Hyde
she'd
Park.
be like, you know what I mean? It's like she has to go to like Paris Fashion Week with like security guards or whatever. Okay.
Okay, but
Slay.
give us your community ideas if you live locally to Toronto, and maybe that's something we can. I would just like love to. It would just feel so nice. I think even to like have a space where we can hang out and do like science church. We're starting Scientology.
Yeah, literally.
Okay, let's take a little break and then we'll come back for our What'd You Learn This Week's.